everyone! Have you ever wondered what makes someone truly wealthy? Is it their bank balance, the number of zeros at the end of their paycheck, or the luxury they can afford? Or is it something more, something far deeper than material wealth? Today I'm going to share the story of a billionaire whose wealth wasn't measured by the usual standards of money and status, but by something far more valuable: humility, generosity, and the quiet strength of his actions. Meet Thomas Winters, a man whose name echoed in boardrooms around the world. He was a self-made billionaire, renowned not just for his business acumen but also for the success of his empire. His sleek office in the heart of the city symbolized everything that he had achieved: vast networks, countless employees, and a fortune that most people could only dream of. From the outside, Thomas had it all: a mansion, private jets, and a beautiful wife, Alice, who stood by him, supportive and elegant. They had everything anyone could ever ask for, yet behind the gleaming facade of wealth and success, there was something that didn't quite sit right. Despite their apparent perfection, Thomas and Alice had been experiencing a strain in their marriage. Alice, as graceful and loving as she was, began to notice subtle changes in Thomas. His long hours at work, his distance at home, and his strange, unexplained absences began to gnaw at her. It wasn't that she doubted his loyalty, but the increasing amount of time he spent away from her left her questioning the nature of his actions. And there was another factor. His behavior had changed. He seemed more distant, more focused on appearances than ever before. Alice, with her sharp intuition, couldn't shake the feeling that something was off, particularly when it came to one thing: the shelter. As the business community observed Thomas's increasing visits to the shelter, curiosity and suspicion started to mount. Many of his colleagues, accustomed to his polished, high-status persona, couldn't quite grasp the reason for his sudden involvement in such an unassuming place. They whispered amongst themselves, wondering if his actions were part of a larger personal agenda, or perhaps a philanthropic venture designed to burnish his reputation. Some even speculated about the beautiful woman running the shelter, questioning whether there was more to Thomas's visits than met the eye. Yet, as time passed, their perceptions began to shift. What seemed like a mystery soon unfolded into something far deeper, a revelation that would challenge their assumptions and change the way they saw him forever. Thomas had been volunteering at a local shelter, a place that catered to the needy and marginalized, but he had insisted on keeping it a secret. To Alice, it didn't add up. Why the secrecy? Why not let people know about the good he was doing? And then there was the other woman, a woman who often appeared at the shelter, a beautiful and graceful woman whose presence stirred a sense of discomfort in Alice. She couldn't help but wonder, was there something more to Thomas's involvement at the shelter? Was he the man she thought he was, or was he hiding something? The suspicion weighed heavily on Alice's heart, but her sense of loyalty and respect for her husband kept her from confronting him directly. She watched, stewing in her doubts, her feelings of betrayal growing stronger, but she had never been the type to jump to conclusions, so she remained quiet, putting on a smile whenever Thomas was around, even as her heart ached with uncertainty. What could she do? What was the truth behind his actions? One evening, Alice finally found the courage to ask Thomas about the shelter. "Thomas, you've been spending so much time there lately. Who's that woman you've been seen with? What's going on?" Her voice trembled with the weight of her emotions, her fear that her worst suspicions might be true. Thomas paused, looking at her with a calm expression that seemed out of place given the gravity of the question. "You're concerned about her, aren't you?" Thomas said gently, his voice devoid of any defensiveness. Alice nodded, biting her lip as she awaited his response. But Thomas didn't react as she expected. Instead of becoming defensive, he smiled softly, his eyes full of understanding. "I think it's time you come with me to the shelter, Alice," he said quietly. "I want you to see for yourself what I've been doing. I want you to understand." Curiosity piqued. Alice agreed. She didn't know what to expect, but she felt that she needed to know the truth. The next day, they drove together to the shelter. Alice's heart raced as they pulled up to the modest building, the faint smell of cleaning supplies and food filling the air. It wasn't the glamorous, polished world Alice was used to. This place was raw, real, and full of stories of hardship and struggle. As they entered, Thomas greeted the staff with quiet authority, leading Alice down a narrow hallway. The atmosphere was warm, yet there was a palpable sadness in the air. And then Alice saw her, the beautiful woman. But this time, something was different. Instead of the graceful, aloof figure Alice had imagined, this woman was kneeling beside a man lying on a bed, his body wrapped in bandages, his face pale from pain. Alice's breath caught in her throat as she recognized him. He was one of the workers from Thomas's factory, the one who had been injured on the job 2 years ago. Alice's mind whirled. The woman was his wife, and this wasn't an affair. This was something far more profound. She had been wrong all along. The man in the bed had broken his back in an accident at Thomas's factory, and for 2 years Thomas had taken responsibility for his care, covering his medical expenses, and ensuring his family had everything they needed. The beautiful woman, whom Alice had once seen as a threat, was simply a devoted wife caring for her husband, who had been left paralyzed after the accident. As Thomas explained, Alice's heart sank with guilt and a profound sense of admiration. For 2 years, Thomas had quietly supported this family, helping them when they had no one else. He had arranged for specialized medical care, helped with daily needs, and provided financial support for their children. The woman Alice had mistakenly seen as a rival was, in fact, someone Thomas had been helping because, for him, it was never about appearances. It was about doing what was right. Alice felt tears well up in her eyes as she looked at Thomas, who stood humbly beside her, watching the woman care for her husband. "You see," Thomas said quietly, his voice full of warmth, "true wealth isn't about what you own or how many people admire you. It's about what you give and how you make a difference in someone else's life. This is my true work, Alice." The realization hit Alice like a tidal wave. She had been so caught up in appearances, so fixated on her insecurities, that she had failed to see the depth of Thomas's character. She had misjudged him, letting doubt cloud her perception of the man she loved. But here, in this humble shelter, surrounded by people whose lives had been touched by Thomas's generosity, she saw the truth. True wealth wasn't in the glittering world of high society. It was in the quiet acts of kindness, in the ways we lift others, and in the humility that guides our actions. With a lump in her throat, Alice turned to Thomas. "I'm so sorry," she whispered, her voice breaking. "I didn't understand. I didn't know." Thomas smiled, a gentle, understanding smile. "It's okay, Alice. We all get caught up in the world sometimes. But the important thing is to always remember that our actions speak louder than our words, and the most valuable thing we can offer is love, empathy, and selflessness." The lesson that Thomas taught Alice that day stayed with her for the rest of her life. And from that moment on, she became a true partner in his mission of kindness and generosity. Together they continued to make a difference in the world, knowing that true wealth lies not in what we have, but in what we give. With that said, thanks for watching, and until next time.